Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to episode 133 of Into the Outer Realms. I am your interstellar host, Joey Medea, bringing you into the outer realms where the paranormal and the supernatural are just the normal of the natural. The more that I learned about them in this 13, well, say 15, 20-year journey, 13 years since Tanya and I saw the interdimensional, that really opened things up. And we had our abduction contactee experience. It's becoming more normal and natural. I'm wearing my Stranger Things t-shirt today because it's been very strange at the Creative Cottage. We have had a theft right on our property line of several beautiful young aspens. We think it maybe has to do with the prison backing away. Maybe someone's building a bridge or hiding some stuff or doing something. It's been a crazy couple of days. Aspens are heavy in the Fey energy. They're big with the Celtics, with the Highlanders, a lot of the things that I write about, a lot of things that have to do with the archetypes and all. We have Ciel, Luciole with us again tonight. Now, some of you were expecting Michael. They work as a super duo. Michael has some family obligations, so he may be in and out of the chat room, but he couldn't commit to being on air and, of course, leaving and going out. But Michael is going to be with us as far as I understand. So let's roll the opening real quick. Let's get to it. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Remember, I did archetypes last week. I'm going to try not to repeat myself. This is a follow-on. But the big mission tonight is to let you know that this whole idea that they need to be suppressed, obliterated, denied, that they're evil, wrong, undesirable parts of your personality. Ciel and I hopefully are going to blow that way out of the water tonight. So welcome. It's always a pleasure. And let's go with the opening. There exists a realm beyond our wildest dreams, a realm beyond reality that the gatekeepers and guardians have always told us consists of nothing but tricks of the eye, weather balloons, swamp gas, sand cranes, fairy tale myths of monsters, crackpot conspiracy theories, and desperate cries for attention.
We know this realm exists, and it's just beyond the horizon. The preset path, the well-worn walkways where the cynics want us to stay.
Instead, give this a listen. Put on your headphones, adjust your volume, close your eyes, and fasten your mental seatbelts because the twilight-tinged turnoff from reality's alluring highway is looming just ahead.
We're about to leave the plane of the easily explained, couldn't possibly be's, and the no way I just saw what I saw's, for the spaces and places where everything is possible, and if you stay long enough, even probable. We're about to take a journey into the outer realms. All right, been talking away in the chat room with some of our folks. Michael is here today, so hopefully he's going to chime in as his time and responsibilities allow with some of this. But let's just bring Ciel on. I think this is your fourth or fifth time on the show, so that's awesome.
Something like that. I've lost count.
Yeah. So always a pleasure. Let's just dive in because we're going to try to keep it to an hour, and it's good stuff. So the shadow, when did you first go, oh, there's this thing and I need to explore it?
A while ago, actually, although I didn't necessarily have a word for it at first. My intro into witchcraft was actually via Starhawk's reclaiming tradition, which is a branch of the fairy tradition. So while most folks from my generation had their intro with Silver Raven Wolf, sorry, I always forget. I kind of went the Starhawk path, which was more indicative of the 70s movement versus the 80s and 90s. I just, thanks to PBS, I got my hand on it. So that particular tradition has always talked about shadow work. So before I ever even learned basic things like calling the watchtowers and all the stuff that everybody associates with 90s witchcraft, I was learning the Iron Pentacle and shadow work from there. They have work with Kor, Persephone, and descent into the underworld as part of the tradition. So it was actually introduced to me very, very early. That's not the easiest book to get your start with, to be honest, right, because it is a very specific, very in FERI record, in case anyone wants to look it up. It's a very specific tradition with a lot of offshoots, but there are some core principles, like the Iron Pentacle is one of them. I know it's Silver Ravenwolf, but you know what I usually say. I was trying to say it right. It's not an easy book for the beginner. So it wasn't until I was, older and understood, because I got started around 15 and with that book. So you get introduced to the concept of shadow work, but most teenagers are not going to be capable of that level of shadow work. Like they can, but teenagers are not the most self-aware people. I mean, let's be real. Like there are some, exceptions, of course, but most teenagers are not, sitting down thinking about, let's unpack my dark self. Right. They don't really have the emotional maturity to do that. You start looking into those things. I think personally, you start really things in your 20s, like your early 20s, when you start to develop as a person outside of your home. And you're starting to do for yourself and realize that you might not be exactly who you were in high school now that you're older. And with self-awareness comes a need for, or rather self-awareness comes with shadow work. Honestly. So as you grow and become, a lot of people don't realize what they're doing is shadow work, but as you unlearn those generational things, as you unpack the crud that your parents might have taught you, or your grandparents, or whatever, that might not necessarily have been the best lessons in the world. As you start to unpack that and let that go and develop your own personality and recognize your faults and grow as a person, that's shadow work. And people don't realize that that's what they're doing.
Right, exactly. So I came to it instinctively when I was a teenager, growing up at a time where, I wanted to be an actor, I wanted to be a writer, all that. I was very committed to it. And so it's like, who do you think you are? And, oh, you're too much this, and oh, you're too much that. So you're always stuffing stuff down. So when I went to college, I knew that I had these two distinct personalities. Now, it's very weird because I got introduced, unfortunately, to shadow work through Jung, who said some very positive things, but at first said it's the thing a person has no wish to be. So I bought into that, right? I'm like, oh, there's this part of me that's unlikable, it's unlovable, it's dangerous, it's ugly, it's violent. So I spent most of my college years and the first couple of years out of college trying to suppress this thing, beat it into submission, get rid of it. Now, at the same time, I was in a very intense conservatory theater program after coming out of musical theater. So the college that I went to courted me, gave me a bunch of money, a big scholarship, and gave me these hardcore roles where I played murderers and a lot of murderers. And it would really break me down because what you naturally want to have come out as a storyteller, as an actor, is have all this stuff to draw on and know what it's like and play the as if. And one night I'm playing this conniving murderer, and I went to the stage manager, who's a very gruff Philadelphia girl named Margie. I loved her dearly. And I said, Margie, this guy is nothing like me. I can't do this. And she said, Joey, that's why it's called acting. And I'll never forget that. So then I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and I just want to say before I turn it back over, it's all about Jung's feelings of encountering, assimilating the shadow. But all through it, it's fear, it's disgust, it's remorse, it's guilt, it's compassion, grief, and humility, and shame. And he talks about his mother like shaming him, and coming from a Sicilian, Italian, New Jersey household, it was nothing but shame. Nothing but shame. So you and I came to it from two very different places, and it took me, and I'm going to hold it and turn it back over to you, talk about it later, how I finally came to realize that it was an ally. And then I made friends with it, and boy, did everything open up. But we'll save that. So back to you. So what was as you learned about it, how did you start to engage with it?
For me, it took a much more practical turn, more so than spiritually at first. I've never had any issue embracing what people would consider the shadow or the dark side of magic. That's never been an issue for me. My shadow work came initially when I was no longer in my mother's home.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk about this because she won't know this exists unless I tell her. So, and we won't be telling her. I know y'all in the chat that know me.
Don't hot link Ciel's mom.
I learned some very unfortunate behaviors from my mother and her family. They're very, okay, we're mad, let's start swinging. There was a fist hole in every room of my house growing up from my mother and her sister getting mad at each other. My aunt, who I am zero contact with, to this day thinks that if she's angry with someone, she's like almost 70 and she'll shoving her daughter, my cousin, if she doesn't behave in a way that she thinks she should. And this woman's 50 years old and she still thinks she can do this. That's kind of behaviors that I was unfortunately taught in my mother's household. I did have some balance to that. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house as well. And they balanced out the crazy, but they were also old school, mildly racist and sexist. So it was just a hot mess from both directions. Like their great hope for me in life was to be a secretary or a teacher, or some other feminine profession. So when I got out into the world, I had some very skewed ideas about how to interact with people, and I had, to this day, I still have anger issues as far as having anger, but I have a very carefully cultivated, ironclad sense of self-control, mostly. Don't touch my cat. It's a different thing.
Reasonable.
But that was a lot to unpack, and I went through some very uncomfortable experiences interacting with people as I went away to school and was around completely different. Plus, my hometown is Lord, it is small farm town, California. They all probably voted for Trump. I don't even know. It was a whole different thing, and I had some very bad ideas about how to interact with people. Raised, and there were some very bad, experiences that came from that, and I had to unpack a lot of that stuff, a lot of the aggressive behavior, a lot of the, entitled anger is like what I call it, because you can be angry, but that doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want about it.
Nice.
But they have a very entitled anger, and why freeze on my face like that? But so my shadow work started with a very practical thing. I had to find my balance emotionally. I had to understand that, not everyone was entitled. I wasn't entitled to take my anger out on everyone. And just some really worked ideas about how you interact with the world. So that's how my shadow work started. My shadow work very often takes more physical, practical element versus spiritual. Not to say that it doesn't happen spiritually. Don't get it twisted. They like to mess with me in that regard too. But more often I come back to the point of needing to manage my mental outset, my mindset, my emotions, the more practical elements of it. So that's where I really got started with it in my early 20s. And from there evolved more into the concept of spiritual shadow work and things of that nature.
Right. So I grew up, like I said, a Sicilian in New Jersey. You can extrapolate out the rest. And I really did kind of have this, and I felt like I had these two distinct personalities, which I used to call Joe. That was the good son, the oldest son with the same name as my dad, went to college, met the college girl, was engaged for X amount of time. But then, like Harry Chapin says in the taxi ride in New York City, there's this wild man inside me. And that was Joey. So I'm reading things like Robert Bly's, Iron John. it was the time in the 90s of the I went to a college, it was Beaver College at the time, it's Arcadia University now, but 7 girls to every guy, a very heavy, I was an English major and theater major, and everything went through the lens of women's studies. So you're feeling like I was feeling like a toxic male before anybody talked about like toxic males.
Right.
So there was a lot of that stuff. And I had a lot of growing up and all to do. So these 2 distinct personalities, it wasn't until I started to get them into conversation. I'm just going to tell a quick parable, and then maybe that will pick up something and you can go with it. And I try to always get this right. But an old wise man is walking in this village, and he enters the village, and all the people have been wounded. They all have snake bites from this cobra. And he says, oh my gosh, this is a terrible thing. Let me go talk to Cobra and see what I can find out. So he goes to Cobra, and Cobra's in his den. He says, Cobra, why are you attacking everyone? And he says, well, they come by and they try to steal my things, and they bother me and they upset me. And what am I supposed to do? And he says, well, have some compassion, like just be chill. I'm trying to go fast here. And so the old man goes about his travels, and he comes back to the town as he does, coming in the opposite way. So I'm sure he's somewhat of a trickster, which I hope we'll talk about tonight. And he goes past Cobra's cave, and Cobra's lying there practically like dead, just beaten to hell. And he says, Cobra, what the hell happened? And he said, well, I was chill, and I stopped defending myself. People started coming in my cave, taking what they want. Then they saw that I wasn't attacking them, so they beat me, and you see the point of this parallel. Like the old man says, you have fangs, you have power for a reason, to defend yourself or whatever. And I always think of that when I got my shadow and, Joe and Joey in conversation, that sometimes you need your fangs, right? I mean, there was this desecration
Absolutely.
and a trespass of our property.
Oh yeah.
So does that story kind of resonate with you? Does that?
Absolutely. People, in my opinion, and of course this is all just my own opinion, people, in my opinion, have a skewed idea of what shadow work entails, or what your shadow self, I should say, entails. They look as though it's the repository for all of your negative attributes, all of the grimiest parts of yourself, and that's all that it is. It's not at all. Your shadow self is it's the dark part of yourself. It's the part of the void of the universe where creation comes from. And self can harbor wonderful, beautiful things. Like anger can be righteous and good. Anger at injustice, anger at people being harmed, at people going without homes, without food, without health care in one of the richest countries in the world. Being angry about these things is right and good. We should be angry about these things. And that is where we get the do something about it. Without that anger, without that shadow self, without that dark part of yourself saying, get angry about this, you're just going to say, well, that's probably fine. The light side is great. The light is wonderful, but it's complacent. The light is complacent. The light is content to simply be. And that's a great thing. Sometimes you need to you need to be in that place of gentle existence, of just simply being. But sometimes you also need to rage, and you need to burn it all down. And that is where that comes from. And people who deny that, I think, are denying an immense untapped well of power when they say, well, I'm love and light only. That's I'm going to talk about someone in one of my groups. I'm not going to name any names or anything. And I don't think this person watches the show. And if they do, don't take it personally. You know what I mean? This isn't an attack, and I'm not trying to shame them. Everyone has to walk their own path. It just is the perfect example for what we're talking about. They joined my group. This is for the local area pagans to network. Therefore, and she introduced herself and said that she was a self-initiated guardian of the light. That's what she called herself. I was like, okay, cool. And so, you can. David knows, he's a moderator in that group. About. So we engaged her, and we were like, what does that mean to you? We've never heard of that. Exactly what does that mean in your path, so that we can just to understand what she meant better. And by her definition, it's that she will always fight for love and light and completely rejects the darkness completely. That it has nothing to do with her. She rejects it completely, and that she is a champion of love and light, and that she will fight for that, and that's it. And I'm like, okay, cool, do you, whatever. But in the course of this conversation, she mentioned that she is also willing to bind spirits if she thinks that they're doing harm. Now, I'm not shading a binding. Like, if a binding is necessary, do what you gotta do. The last resort, but still, whatever. But the point, and I brought this up to her as gently as I could, because I wanted her to know I was engaging her in conversation, not trying to attack her. But there are people who consider bindings to be of any kind for any reason to be in and of itself a dark working, because you are away their free will, you're taking away. And like I said, I'm not above a binding, so I'm not saying that this is my opinion. But there are light people, light workers, however you want to call them, who have argued this point with me, who've been like, we won't bind because it's manipulative, you're taking away free will, there's other actions. And they make some good points. Like, if you want to be creative, there are other things you can do. There's warding, there's, releasing them to, find the light, helping them cross over, finding out why there's a lot of other things you could be doing. You are, in fact, attempting to champion love and light only. That's her go-to, though. She's like, I'll stuff them in a divot box, like that was, basically what she said. And I'm like, all right, so you're not seeing, like, and I just kept gently, she's like, well, I know that that's what other people believe, but that's not my opinion. If they're, malevolent, then I'm going to do what I have to do. And I definitely agree with that stance, but she's missing the point of what she's doing. She's engaging in a shadow act. The light, she's missing the whole point of what the shadow self is for. And she doesn't even realize that she is actually engaging with her shadow side. When she embarks on that binding, she is making a choice to bind the will of another entity, whether it's for a good reason or not. She's still making that choice. Right. That is where the shadow can give you power. Shadow can come into play, but that's not even shadow work to her. That's not even, that's, and she was, and I just kind of ended up leaving the conversation because the only way for me to give input was to be very blunt. And while I don't typically have an issue with that in, personal conversations, a lot can be misconstrued in text. And, I wasn't necessarily looking to make anybody feel attacked. So I just, sorry, I heard a suspicious noise. I thought
no, I know. Believe me, after the past 2 nights, I know. So I just ended up leaving the conversation, but it stuck with me, and I knew that I was going to use it as an example for this conversation because, she's arguing with me that she completely denies the shadow and any kind of darker workings, and yet she's still willing to employ a divot box. She's still willing to employ a binding, and she's deciding what deserves binding. I'm not saying she shouldn't, but she's not acknowledging the act for what it is. In my opinion, she's not acknowledging the act for what it is, and in my opinion, definitely lessening the impact that the working is going to have. Right.
Because she's completely rejecting the power her shadow self can give her.
Right. So I like this comment by David. I happen to be one of these people, and I think that maybe artists and storytellers tend to be decent ones anyway. But the shadow self is an interesting. Some people prefer keeping their shadow private to themselves. Mm-hmm. Others prefer to activate their shadow, and I love that word, activate it, to make a practical ally outside of the hidden self. And that really has been my path. I mean, I have alter egos like the pirate Angus McGregor, who's I picked 3. I picked the rebel, I picked the queen, and I picked the clown, right? Because if you think of the Joker movies and the, all this kind of stuff, but the clown operating as the trickster, the queen who could be, look, England just lost a queen who was incredibly complex, and I think had an activated shadow. She did, I think. So she wasn't quite off with their heads. which is, of course, the extreme for storytelling. And then, of course, there's the rebel. And I think of, and I don't mean to bore everyone, but in the golden age of piracy, at the front end, there were people like, oh, and I thought of another analogy too. There were people like Sam Bellamy and the guys that I play, even Blackbeard, Jacobite cause and all that. By the end of it, there were guys like Ed Lowe who were slitting throats, cutting out tongues, posting them to, and that is a corruption of the rebel. And it made me think of January 6th for some people who, let's rebel. I love the image of the rebellion. I am against. I remember my Antoinette, one of my mentors, the Gulf War, and people were doing protests. And she was like, do you know, even when you're protesting for a good cause, that's still negative energy. You're protesting. You're against. There are other ways to get the message known, to sue for peace, as you would. And I always thought that was interesting. So I don't go to protests, but I do other things. Let's start there. What's your opinion on that sort of idea?
Well, it's funny we're talking about activism and protesting because there's a very slim chance my father is watching this on YouTube from work. He works for Intel, and my father is a very, very old school activist. And,
all right. Okay.
The Wobbly, I don't know if you know what that is, a member of the IWW.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's an old school Wobbly, Earth First, all that. And he took me to my very first protest. And you know, whenever I go out now, I always put his number in Sharpie on my arm. I get arrested, and you know, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So clearly, I am okay with protesting.
Right.
I don't know if I would call it negative energy. I really don't. It can become negative energy. Like, don't get me wrong. There are certain instances in those protests where negative energy. There's a particular group of protesters associated with Antifa that are referred to, and Antifa, for anybody gets it started, Antifa just means anti-fascist. Technically, I'm a member of Antifa. All right.
Oh, okay.
What anybody who's anti-fascist technically is, it's not an organization. There's no head of Antifa. It's just say, I am against fascism. What most people are thinking of when they talk about the horrors of Antifa, they're talking about a certain group called the Black Bloc, BLOC. They're pains in the butt, man. They just cause problems everywhere, and they make it worse for everybody trying to protest. And most protesters don't even like them. God hates them. It can become negative very quickly if the people protesting take it a certain way. Protesting is it's a very complicated topic. It's necessary. At times, I do believe it is necessary. Sometimes the only way to people to listen is to show up in force and to say, we are here, we are not going away. There is a certain way to go about it. I don't believe destruction of property is necessarily the way. I'm not going to touch on the Black Lives Matter movement, which I support, and their destruction of property. That's a more complicated topic, and it's not for me to discuss.
Right.
At least not in depth, and not.
Right.
It can be a destructive force. It can be a negative force. People can get hurt. But I do believe it can be a necessary changing force. And I don't negative in this instance isn't necessarily,
right.
You know, you talk about negative, positive charges. You don't say the negative charge is a bad charge. It's just different. Sometimes you have to approach with that dark energy so that people realize that we will not be suppressed, essentially.
Right.
Sometimes until you get angry and in their face, they don't believe you. And it's sometimes unnecessary. And I do mean sometimes. I don't think it always serves a purpose. I don't think that everybody goes about it the right way.
Right.
Don't necessarily call it a negative an action or generating negative energy, because it's chaotic energy, sure, but chaos is where creation comes from. So that's not necessarily a bad thing to me.
Right. And I think, let me go back. I think David hits it
really,
absolutely on the head.
Too.
Yeah. Extremists on both sides are a pain in the ass. And that's really what I'm teaching. I mean, I have Socrates up here on my wall, and I'm going out and, you know, the mentor and the teacher, you know, which again, if you're warping minds, That's really what we're talking about today. We're really talking about balance, but I don't want to just bleed it down to balance. I think it's insulting to you and I and to our audience, who's way smarter than that, to just go balance, balance, balance. Okay, we're done. It's more complicated. And you're right. I think of Waynesboro Church, right? That's those guys. Okay. So exactly. And you think about the civil rights movement and the student movements, and then you have the more radicals, right? So you go from Gandhi's and Martin Luther King, and then you go to the SDS, right, the Students for a Democratic Society, but then they splinter into the Weathermen. And I think you can talk in terms of the shadow and where you place, so I think it's very productive, but I think we can get away from it too. David's got some good stuff here. Chaos gets a bad rap. I agree.
David is, as I often say, is one of my heathens. Back when my group was public, he was one of its main members. He's been very much a part of my tradition building, and as far as being someone I have shared it with. And we both are identify as chaos witches. So it's not surprising that he is out here touting the benefits. Because
and it's central to alchemy, and alchemist is one of my core. Good stuff happens in that chaos, and I want to put
where creation comes from.
Yeah. David said a lot of good positive energy is found from protests. So Lori says, I've been on both sides of the audience argument. I've been on lists. Lori, I am on several lists. And I think after my dangers of disclosure a month ago, I'm on some more lists. I don't let that frighten me.
Pretty sure my dad is. If they know that he's my father, and probably him too.
Yeah.
If I'm not on it on my own, just for being a hugely subversive feminist voice that runs her mouth a lot.
That's right. And those are good lists. I mean, and
I'm here for it. Put me on it,
Yeah. And that strength comes from the shadow sides of these things. Because that's where the claws and the teeth sometimes are. That's the strength. That's the ability to, so the alchemist. Okay, let's look at these Carolyn Mays cards here. So the shadow attribute is the misuse of power and knowledge that come through spiritual practice. So of course we know people who do, use it for maybe the wrong reasons. A hermit, you withdraw so much out of society. This is interesting because, there's the personal unconscious, and then there's the collective unconscious. So let's talk in terms of the collective unconscious with this othering and the out of balance and the extremists who are the loudest people, right? They're talking way the hell louder than us. Most people are
such a loud mouth, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk over you, but
no.
I have a way of running my mouth. I usually say I talk a lot of smack, and I don't consider myself an extremist. I'm, incredibly liberal, and I think people should have food and homes and healthcare and all this stuff. Lives, you do these things.
Right.
I'm extremely liberal, I guess you would say. I'm definitely a socialist. I think we should take care of our people, and that shouldn't even be a question. I would even question that. And I run my mouth a lot about that because a lot of people aren't, and a lot of the people who are liberal and who feel like us don't, because we realize that you're basically kicking water uphill, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, and I don't think that extremely liberal is extremist either. It's the exclusionary of no matter what you say, you're wrong. I'm not going to let you say it. I mean, it's the absence of dialogue. I've been saying since 9/11 that confrontation is the new communication, and that just doesn't get anything done when everybody's just yelling at each other. So I forget what I was gonna say. I think I was gonna set something up for you, but I do know something. Oh, so the collective unconscious, the rebel is kind of out of whack. I can't remember. So let's go into this while I'm trying to think of it. You brought something to my attention, which I think the audience is just going to love, and I want to make sure to get to it. So let's do it now. The opportunity for shadow work around the time of your birthday, your rebirth. You want to, because my birthday's coming up in about a month, and yours is tomorrow, by the way. Ciel's is tomorrow, so make sure to wish her a happy birthday. And Explain the shadow work that goes with birthday, because I want to learn this.
Well, this was a concept that was actually introduced to me by a group of witches that I knew back when I lived in Washington State. Like, I was like in my early 20s. It was one of those situations where they weren't close enough for me to be part of their group regularly. But for the holidays, I would travel out to their Covenstead for the Sabbats. And they were the ones who actually introduced me to this topic. I was speaking with one of their members my birthday, and I historically have rubbish birthdays. Like, they're terrible. No, like, occasionally I have a good birthday, but only when I orchestrate it from start to finish. If I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm having this, you can come if you want, this is happening, this is like, if I orchestrate everything, then it's okay. But if not, it's always absolute it's just rubbish. Like, there's no think positive. It's just what it is. And it doesn't bother me as much as it used to, maybe because of this idea, but I was having it was bad. I was still married at the time, and we weren't married long, if that tells you anything about how the marriage was. It was just a bad day all around. We'd been fighting, and I was chatting with this friend, and this, back in the days before cell phones, MSN Messenger on a computer chatting type of thing. I'm old, y'all. I'm 46 tomorrow, y'all. Anyway, and I was just having a meltdown, crying, and I was like, it is my birthday, just having this total meltdown. And she's like, oh, well, that explains everything. What are you talking about, crazy person? So she explained to me this concept of every year around your birthday, they considered it the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after. So essentially your birthday month, but it was most prevalent the week before and after. They considered, as you entered into your solar return, essentially, you entered into a cosmic rebirth. You entered back into that place of nebulous chaos from which you originally came. And when you think about it, your birthday is supposed to be a joyous celebration, but how many people find themselves spiraling down the hole about, okay, I'm this old now, I haven't done this, I haven't accomplished this, I'm still doing this, what am I doing with my life? And it's not just aging that's doing that to you. Some of that is the, societal pressure to have a certain type of birthday, and also, that by the age, certain age, you're supposed to have accomplished this, and this, and if you haven't, it builds up. But it's the same type of thing for me that I encounter at New Year's. But it's a little bit more than that. Like, if people really think about it, it goes beyond just, well, I don't have the house, I don't have the children, or it becomes, what am I doing with my life? And that's a very deep question. People don't realize it, even if they just ask themselves that in passing. Right. It's a big deal. You're acknowledging a very big deal. You're sitting down and saying, what am I doing with my life? What do I want to do with my life? That is a very big question. It's a very big ask of yourself. And I don't think people sit long enough. They have the thought when they're depressed on their birthday, and then they go back about their life and they continue on in the same patterns because they're not looking at it as an opportunity to emerge from this birthday solar return period as a new person, as a rebirth person with a renewed purpose. They don't think about it that way. I'm getting old, so I'm depressed, because that's what society tells us it is. They're like, oh, you're old, so you feel bad because you're 46, and women are supposed to feel bad when they're 46 or something. I don't know. Good luck. But but they don't realize that it's an opportunity, really. It can be hard. It's very depressing sometimes, and circumstances aren't always great on your birthday, and it feels like it always should be. It feels like you should be celebrating and there should always be a party, but when you're 46, you don't always get the freaking party, man. It is what it is. And if you have those thoughts, say, like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with myself? If you take the time to sit with them and be like, well, this is my solar return. Do I want to start the new path around the sun as the same person? Do I want to be someone different? And I'm not saying you're going to wake up the day after your birthday thinking new, fresh out the box. All right.
Right.
the start of the work. This is this is the analyzing process. This is the chaos process. This is the germination, when you're in the void, looking at what you're wanting to create, what you're wanting to birth. And as you move out of this period is when you start to weave that into reality, is when you start to take all that nebulous energy and weave it into what you want to be. And it's hard work, because you have to look at things that you don't like. And sometimes those are pretty heavy things. Like sometimes that's your job, sometimes that's your spouse, sometimes that's your house where you live. Like sometimes that's a very big thing, and that's a hard thing to look at. And if you take that look and you're like, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this is going, keep doing this, then great. But at least you still took the time. You still looked and you're like, no, I'm pretty content with this. And that's okay. You don't have to be one of these people who's absolutely torn to shreds every birthday. Like some of us are just dramatic. It's a goth thing. We can't help ourselves. Traumatized every birthday. Like you can look at your life and be content with what you've built and with the path that you're on, but still just taking the time to check in during that period and acknowledging the feelings of darkness, the feelings of dread for what they are, because not everybody has them. I know some people who every year, like I have a friend who she's an October baby, and October is birthday month. Like it's the month, and she makes a production. It's a whole thing.
I love it.
And it's great. And I think it's great. That's how it works for her. Not everybody their shadow work the same way. And it's okay. Like I said, it's okay. Don't sit there and think, well, I don't feel that way on my birthday. I really like my birthday. That's fine. You can really like your birthday. Not everybody goes through shadow work at the same time. You know, like October, moving up to Samhain, All Hallows, Halloween, whatever you want to call it, is considered shadow work time. Everybody's shadow work. The veil is thinning. The ghosts are walking. Shadow work. And that's true. It's a great time for that, because, you know, nature is dying. We're going into the dark time. But other than and maybe it's because I'm an October baby that it's different for me, but other than my birthday purge, if you will, I find that I'm thrown into my shadow work when spirit's like, all right, this. When that happens, it tends to be in the spring. Maybe that's because I'm an October baby, so I've already got one purge in autumn, and so they're like, oh, I will just let her chill for the winter and recover, and then we'll just smack her again in the spring. You know, maybe it's because my moon sign is in Aries, and that's when Aries comes into powers in the spring. Who knows? But that's when I typically tend to find myself faced with, you know, the spiritual shadow work, I guess I would say, which is, you know, kind of backwards from what most people experience. Most people have that kind of spiritual shadow work in the darker months in October, because, you know, witches, we love Halloween, you know, this is what it is. And I'm one of them, but I love Halloween, but that's not when spirit wants me to go through my shadow work. I already get the more practical purge as far as, you know, knowledge, you know, looking at my life. Okay. And then in the spring I get, you know, another 2x4 to the forehead. It's a good time. Total good time.
Nice. Yeah, no, I go through a cyclical thing. It's nice because Halloween is like 5 days before my birthday, so it's nice. But go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think astrological is actually November 5th, if memory serves.
Oh, okay, cool.
That, but the 4 static holidays in the Witches' Sabbats actually have an astrological time when, because they did actually happen astrologically as well. So I do believe, if memory serves, oh, hi Anna, if memory serves, the 5th of November is astrological Samhain. So
nice.
Yeah, in the middle of it.
And it works for me. Everybody who follows my Facebook page will know that around December 1st, I post this series of pictures of Jack Nicholson with the typewriter in The Shining, because that's where I go into the cave. So my shamanic cycle, my highly sensitive person, I do not tour in the winter. I hate traveling in the snow, driving in it, being in it. I like to watch it, be out in it, but I don't want to be in the road on it. And so I go into the cave and I do all my writing, and that is all about my chief archetypes, letting the shadow out to play, all that kind of stuff. So when I come out in the spring, I have to be recharged, imbalanced, strong enough through the shadows of my archetypes to be able to go out in the world and go on tour for 3 weeks, which I
Right.
hate. It's terrible. Hotel rooms and all that. And that's my life. My big one was 50, right? Chiron's return, and it's money issues, and who are you and where have you been? And so I made a very serious pact with myself. My shadow work was very shadow. It's very dark for that year. But it came out kind of okay. Well, it came out okay. I'm here and I'm good. So that's very interesting about, so you do that work in the spring, and those are great energies of rebirth sign of supporting all of that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it to kind of make that connection, because I'm kind of thick sometimes. Dory Fuller is actually my high school best friend.
Oh, neat.
Years ago, and she actually has a PhD in mythology with an emphasis in Jungian archetypes. So,
oh, whoa, awesome!
That's the girl there.
There you go. Nice.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but
no, it's okay. We're managing to throw out a lot of good stuff here. I love when the audience is active. We can't always do that when I have a guest. So that's why I like contributor shows. Let's see here. And I thought I was your favorite witch. Oh, there you go.
Don't be Michael.
Michael's shadow's coming out a little. There. The claws are coming out a little. Thank you for demonstrating how that happens.
Sorry, Anna was mine first.
So Carl Jung did come around, and I do have a pretty great quote for him that the scholar is in the audience here, but he said the shadow, that hidden, suppressed, and for the most part inferior. Now I've come to get way beyond that, and guilt-laden personality, whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors. This is a good thing. If it has been believed hitherto that the human shadow was the source of evil, and I love his work, like Answer to Job, and I thought Jung had a really interesting take on evil that was very instructive. It can now be ascertained on closer investigation, thank you for pursuing this, Carl, that the unconscious man, that his shadow, and sorry for the sexist language, guys, this is Carl, does not consist of only morally reprehensible tendencies, but also displays a number of good qualities, normal instincts. I think instincts in the shadow, right? They come. They're the ones that tell you. Absolutely. So yeah, appropriate reactions. That's that's a little controversial and provocative, but I don't want to speak for you, but I certainly agree that the actions are often appropriate when they come from the shadow.
I do too. Absolutely.
Realistic insights. So that's great. The shadow's the one that goes, get out of your love and light dreamland. Maybe now it's time to, maybe it's time to go to war a little. And your creative impulses. And that's where it really resides for me. God, I would be a boring storyteller. Folks, I portray a lot of characters who had very strong shadows. So Che Guevara, Allen Ginsberg, Edgar Allan Poe. I was offered a very lucrative 2-week teaching gig for the winter. So I was going to break my winter hibernation and go out because the money was good and I was going to reach like thousands of kids. And they said, well, how about your pirate Samuel Bellamy? And I said, yeah, man, that's great. It's awesome. He was anti-slavery. He was a Jacobite. He was trying to get the rightful king on the cause. He was called the Robin Hood of the seas. This is awesome. And they came back and they said, oh, we're critical race theory, and you can't talk about pirates and slavery at all. And I said, well, hold on, time out here. This was a guy who was freeing slaves, who was liberating them, who took over a slave ship. Nope, doesn't matter. You can't go, oh, there was a white guy from England, so a really white guy, almost translucent, who was for getting rid of slavery in the early 1700s. You can't do that. So then they said, but how about Edgar Allan Poe? And I said, oh yeah, I'll dust off Poe and give you Poe. And it came back to me 3 days later and said, oh no, Edgar Allan Poe's lifestyle is inappropriate for children.
Okay, those are fighting words, talking about my boyfriend that way.
Yeah, and most of us, what I said to Tanya when I got off the phone was, not only am I out of the money because they're denying the function of the shadow, but most of us were introduced to short story and poetry in school through Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. So now we're in this move that, because sometimes in his misery he drank. And we were watching something the other night, some movie, and like, oh, Poe the drug addict. And I was like, check the records, bub. You are way the hell off. You're the way the hell off. So this is where the shadow is still like seen as this inferior, guilt-laden, animalistic. It really kind of broke my heart when Joe Rogan said of Che Guevara to 4 million people, he was a mass murderer. That is just not at all true. So,
my opinion only, not associated with Into the
yeah,
Outer Realms, but Joe Rogan needs his lips glued.
yeah. He's got a shadow that's a little out of control sometimes. I think he misunderstands the trickster. What would you say to that? He's got a misunderstanding of the trickster.
Definitely a misunderstanding. Yes, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
he is a healthy trickster archetype.
No. But I think he sees himself as that sort of provocateur, trickster.
He's definitely got some unhealed issues with his masculinity.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, right. There you go.
It's to me, just watching him.
Yeah.
He's got some issues with masculinity.
Yeah, absolutely. And there you go, Dave. Dory says the trickster's job is to break shit through. Absolutely.
And that's not what he's doing. He's lying. No. He's spreading misinformation and harmful. He's doing harm. He's not helping growth. He's doing harm. Yeah. So he is definitely this, like Joey just said, definitely misunderstood. Repressed trickster. Like when you deny the part of your shadow self, that's when it becomes an issue.
Right.
And keep in mind, it doesn't have to be things like rage and anger. For someone who was taught that gentleness and kindness is bad, they're going to suppress that. That's going to become part of their shadow. They're going to hate everything about themselves that is gentle and kind, and it's going to manifest as uncontrolled anger. And so it isn't just, it's my anger and my rage. Depending on how you were brought up and for lack of a better term, what's broken in you, it could be anything. Your shadow could harbor your kindness, your gentleness, your fragility. That is actually, like, I don't want to hear none about the peanut gallery over here, but like vulnerability and showing weak outside of a very select few, like, it's just not a thing I do. Like I will, like, post-COVID, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I have some neuropathy issues as a part of long-haul COVID, and that's my mobility. Even when it's painful, I will still force myself to walk normally when I'm in. Show any sign of pain, it'll be excruciating, but you won't know it until I get to my car and I'm locked in it, because that's that animal part of myself that can't show that weakness, that can't show that vulnerability, that doesn't want the public to see that, because then that makes me look like a target. At least that's what my, animal brain is telling me. We live in a society where that's slightly accurate. They teach women all the time to make sure you look capable, that you don't look like a target. They tell you to carry yourself in a certain way. There are certain women that men won't attack or go after because they look like they don't fight. And that's, I'm, again, with the peanut gallery, that's always kind of the image that I've kind of subconsciously portrayed. One of my friends, mother of my goddaughter, actually, she says that when I walk into a room, the room is overcome with the sounds of cymbals and lightning. And when she says that I'm being a little bit too intense, a little too dark, she'll just look at me and go, like a cymbal crash, and just dial it down a notch. And that's just something that, you do. A lot of people do that. They put that, they hide that. And fragility, vulnerability, kindness, that can be very hard for people to show, because that got taken advantage of in your youth, or if you were taught to shun that. And that's usually what it is. Either someone taught you that. It's most common in boys, let's be real, but don't cry, don't be gentle, don't be, none of any of those things. It's either, you were taught that they were bad, or that displaying those things made you a target and meant that you were abused. That's where that came from for me. Like, you didn't show any of that stuff because that was just ammunition, man.
Right.
They're nothing. They know nothing about you. My family knew nothing about me. So, keep in mind, your shadow isn't just rage. It's not just anger. It's not just pain. It can harbor things that you deny, no matter what that is. It could be love. It could be kindness, fragility. So, I don't want people to look, well, I don't need anger or any of that.
Yeah, right.
It's about looking at yourself, about looking at the parts of yourself that you might not be aware of, that you might not be embracing, that you might be repressing for whatever reason, and healing those parts, finding out how to heal those parts. And for some people, shadow work means therapy. All right, y'all. Yeah. It's not always, I'm gonna go sit in the woods on a tree trunk and on my way with some incense into complete mental health. It don't work that way. Sometimes shadow work means therapy. It means a treatment plan. Sometimes it means medication. Cannot deny those things. If it means your mental health, it means working through these things. If you're going to unpack these traumas and really take a look, you need to consider your mental health, your emotional health. You need to take it slow and examine it as you go. Check in with yourself. Don't just dive in head first and be like, I'm going to rip open this well and just head first into all my dang trauma and then, eating a bottle of pills. Like, don't do that to yourself. Start looking. That's the big thing. Just take a look. Just look and see, and go slowly. Make sure you check in with yourself. Take the steps you need to get the help you need. Because spirituality is great. Meditation, Reiki, going out into nature, those are wonderful things. And especially for someone who has a nature-based spirituality, they will help you immeasurably. I get more benefit in the woods than I do anywhere else. But that's not all it is. You can't pin your mental health on your spiritual path. You can't pin your mental health and your emotional well-being on or the gods or any of that. You need to be realistic. You need to look at it very objectively. You need to be willing to do that. And if you aren't, you need to think about whether or not you're ready to unpack your shadow. Because if you're in a bad place right now, if you're already in a bad place, it may not be time. You may need to get that mental health care first. You may need to get that counseling. Don't feel bad because you need these things. It doesn't make you lesser. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean that you didn't meditate hard enough, that you didn't do enough yoga. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It just means that that's the help that you need, and there's no shame in getting it. And that is part of magic. That is part of shadow work, and it's something that you should be doing to care for yourself.
Right. So. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I just want to say, because it's a big part of my mission, that journaling, getting in conversation with the shadow, creating characters, we'll let them come out and talk. I can't, guys, I can't tell you how my life changed when I got in conversation with my shadow. Stop repressing it. Honored it. I honor it. I honor my shadow, and it's gotten so much healthier. I don't think of it in negative terms. I always get disappointed when I see Jung, and that was my first go. But if you're really interested in this, here's some things. Of course, Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde is about conversation, an unhealthy conversation with the shadow. Jekyll makes his mistake when he says, "It's you or me, Hyde. There's not room for both." And Hyde says, "You brought me in. You brought me out.
There's absolutely room for them both."
Yeah, I do the shit you can't do, pal. So now you're gonna try to murder me. And Jekyll does. He does that ultimate thing. He kills himself to kill his shadow. He ends his life to get rid of his shadow. Of course, Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk's major, great Interview with the Vampire. I'm gonna go out there. This wasn't in my research, but Lewis and Lestat are an exercise in the shadow.
Well, what's funny is back in the way back when the Interview with the Vampire came out and got it on VHS. That. Anne Rice actually did a forward on the old VHS, translated over to DVD or whatever. but she actually did a foreword about the movie. And of course, she was in a chair, as goth as you could be, holding a big copy of Interview with the Vampire. Just talked a little bit about what she thought about the movie. And as part of that, she talked about Lestat, and because it was very important to her how he was brought to life on screen. And she actually called him her dark ego, her dark self, her alter ego, her dark self.
Yeah.
Because if memory serves, she actually wrote that book after one of her children died, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then she also said that her husband, Stan Rice, the poet, was very much Lestat.
Right.
Too. Yeah,
so
which is
I
nice.
think that it was actually an exercise in purging her shadow.
Yeah. Yeah, and a brilliant character, and Lewis encounter and in conversation with that. It's interesting because Brad Pitt had a very hard time. He had a very hard time, and it makes me think of, it goes to the next thing, which is Batman and Joker. So this is the work of a guy named, and Dory may be familiar with this guy, Christopher Perry, who's in the Society of Analytical Psychology. But he said Batman is the superego, Bruce Wayne is the ego, and Joker is the shadow. And Heath Ledger got lost in that whole Joker archetype way further than, Brad Pitt had to check out for several months, and he was young and he got himself together, although he went through his whole thing later. But Heath Ledger, of course, died.
Yeah.
And I always told my students, don't deify this. Don't look up to this and think that you have to die for your art. You do not have to die for your art. There are mechanisms. There are healthy ways, like you were saying. If mental health comes into play, get therapy. Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker is a brilliant exploration of the shadow and the clown and what that is. And we're fascinated in society with this dark evil connotation of the clown, right? American Horror Story did a lot for that. And but I think of Luke in Star Wars, right? Luke is a very active journey of integrating the shadow, because George Lucas was working with Joseph Campbell. Frodo and the Hobbits, those guys aren't the innocent little. They all go through, and I think Pippin and Merry are my favorite characters.
Man.
Yeah, I mean, because they go through a journey, right? They learn how to put on, they literally put on the orc armor, and they look silly, but then they grow into their, and then Heat with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. That conversation they have in the diner.
I don't actually think I've seen that.
Okay, that's okay. I'm a cop and I'm a bad guy, but hey, the cop has a little bit of the bad guy, and the bad guy has a little bit of the law and order cop and chaos and all that. So, Ciel, we are out of time, but thank you so much. David said, read Joseph Hillman. Dory said, read James Hillman. I have a very dear friend whose books I edit in England, who's devising something called poetic psychology. And James Hillman is just her guy. So thank you for that, Dory. And David says, I'd recommend the more recent Harley Quinn series, a very good example of taking your shadow and using it as an ally. So
Joker
awesome.
And Harley Quinn is his jam. Like, no one knows as much about that.
Cool. That's awesome. So thank you, new faces and people who come when Ciel is on. I really appreciate it. Maybe you'll come back. No, that's cool. I love it. People have busy lives. So Ciel, we'll have to have you back on after the new year.
As always.
So thank you very much. Last thoughts. Oh, have a great birthday tomorrow. But last thoughts.
Thank you. I guess if I leave you with anything, just don't be afraid. Don't fear it. It can be very scary. Very scary. But it's you. It's yourself. It's not something external that can harm you. It's you. If you don't understand it, then you're just going to hurt yourself, and that's just counterproductive, y'all.
Right. You have some projects. People can reach out and get to know your work. That would be great as an exit.
Mostly I've been kind of revamping my site a bit. As you know, I used to sell crystals, and I still do. But I was finding I was getting a little bored. That's like my eternal thing. Like I'm all air. I got a ton of air signs. I'm Libra, but I get bored. I get bored really easy. I have a lot of varied interests. Like crystals are great and I love them, but I'm kind of a weird patchwork of interests and things. Like I went to school for musical theater. I used to write for the Sow and Sirens. So yeah, I used to sing, I used to write, I used to do a lot of back into singing. No, I won't do that to you. Okay. But writing is something I've considered taking back up, not like books. I ain't that cool or nothing. But like David remembers the Moon Day forecast. I've been considering bringing that back. And so I kind of revamped my site and I renamed it. It's just Star Spun Chaos now because it's more about it bringing together all the things that I like. And the website is Star. And I'm still doing crystal readings and crystal bundles and things like that. But I'm slowly starting to integrate other things as well. I just recently changed the name and the brand, if you will. I just recently rebranded.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just like 2 years ago. So I haven't quite thrown everything else in there. I'm sort of slowly starting to integrate my writing. And like I also do hand fastings quite a bit locally. I'm licensed pagan clergy. So I'm going to try and kind of incorporate ways for people to find me through there as well. It's kind of a work in process, but I am on Facebook, Ciel, Luciole, Star Spun Chaos, on Instagram, Twitter, all that.
Cool. Awesome. And guys, this is a great example. Last week when I was talking about archetypes, becoming rather than being. That's a great example of that. We're constantly reinventing, rebirthing.
So it's my shadow period. So suddenly I decided I just had to change everything. And so I'm in the process.
I love that. Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you. And we'll get you back on the show after the first of the year.
Alrighty. Thanks so much.
Good night. Just real quick, folks. Next week, Craig will be back. Sinister Mysteries #4. We're doing the Knights Templar. And if you remember, October 13th, our friends across the pond, it's going to be Friday the 13th, when they were rounded up. And that's why that whole Friday the 13th thing happens. So we're going to be talking about the Gnostic, esoteric side, give you a little bit of the history, when they were active, what was going on during the Crusades, how they started as 8 or 12 guys, and built up into a massive organization, the biggest banking organization in Europe, and because of that reason, their downfall. But also their links to the Cathars, other esoteric, like I said, I always wear my Templar stuff. I have my helmet and sword back behind me. So next week I'll have a Templar, all the stuff. And then after that, we have Emily Mittermeier's coming on. She was out west on the Alien Highway and all. She's going to do a travelogue PowerPoint presentation. So that'll be something new and great, a longtime contributor. Wes Roberts is coming back on, and we're going to talk about his books, his 2 books, and the Alien Contactee and all that picking up. We have some great stuff coming up for you between now and the end of the year. I'm very excited. Thank you all. Have a great night. Keep good thought that these horrible aspen cutters are done on our property. We're going to see what happens tonight. We may have some law enforcement and all in the woods trying to get these guys. So it might be a lively night at the Creative Cottage. Anyway, take care. Very grateful for you all. Peace.